I'm out on Silver Moon. There's a storm coming, which means it's very exciting. The atmosphere is quite charged, and I think probably medieval people would have avoided travelling during a storm. I mean, it's not actually raining yet, but it really feels like there's a storm coming. I am going to be cutting the hay in a few days' time as well, so I just wanted to check the landscape and see how it was all going. I've got various bits of equipment out here in the field ready to go. The cutter and the tractor and the baler and all the other bits and pieces of farm machinery. I have a very small tractor though, which is all I need to do the acreage that I've got here. Anyway, around this time of year, I think medieval people would have been thinking about the harvest as well. The hay harvest certainly, barley and corn, wheat as it was known, as it is known today, wouldn't have been harvested yet. They're more in the end, more August. But if you want to collect hay, now's quite a good time. So you probably get fit with the scythe and make sure you put the hay aside for the winter. Get that done, and then you move on to the next round of harvesting. Harvest wasn't just 1 or 2 days, it was a whole season. It was a whole season that people needed to make sure they gathered all the crops in and the food in, and therefore the weather could make a huge difference. If it does rain heavily tonight, I won't be cutting the hay tomorrow. I probably cut it the day after, because there's supposed to be a whole decent chunk of time with no rain at all, probably 10 days with really good drying weather. And hay, modern hay anyway, takes 3 at best, more like 4, sometimes 5 days in the field to dry before you can collect it up. You've obviously got to collect hay dry as possible, otherwise it'll go mouldy in storage. So we're off with lowering clouds. It's rather beautiful, the landscape in this weather, but it feels a bit charged. I think you probably all know what I mean. Oh boy. Woodland was very important for medieval people. It was a resource. They didn't have the same hedges around the fields as we do today. That came with the Enclosures Act in the 19th century, maybe the 18th century. And that meant that people started to enclose what was known as common land before then. There were woodlands, and there were areas of waste as well. Wasteland was a thing in the medieval period. Waste doesn't mean blasted heath or totally destroyed landscape. What it means is it's land that's not cultivated. That's all it means. It's mentioned in the Doomsday Book. You know, it says sort of four acres in waste. What that means is 4 acres that could be planted up, but that aren't. So woodlands are very different from forest. Forest in the medieval period was an area set aside for lords hunting, really. It comes from really was invented in the Norman period. People hunted before then, of course, but the whole concept of forest law goes to the Norman conquest, the Norman invasion, however you want to style it. And they set aside vast areas of land and put them under special law. Forest law included villages and included areas of open terrain and included woodlands, of course, as well. I mean, these days we think of forest, woodland as sort of synonymous, but they weren't back then. It was very specific, and you would be under forest law. You would definitely know you were under forest law, and some of the punishments were very harsh to begin with, but in later periods, fairly rapidly, that was reduced because it was just seen as far too oppressive. But obviously people needed to be a bit careful with the Norman lords around taking over. There was definite issues with the two groups of people. So here we are in these woods. These woods are semi-ancient. They're not properly ancient, they're semi-ancient. They used to be beechwood in the beginning of the 1900s. So there's a lot of beech here, and that was harvested for gun stocks in the rifle stocks in the First World War, and was not so much clear felled, but they took most of the decent beech trees. There are a few left that are very old now, that are probably well over 150 years old. It was then planted up with oak and hazel mix. Hazel for coppicing, that would have normally been coppiced on a rotation of 7 or 16 years for making charcoal. for blacksmithing. Of course, the forests, this woodland at the moment, is not disused, but it's not used for industrial purposes like it would have been back then. It would have been divided into segments, and you can see that on the map. I can see ditches that divide it into 7, actually, really interestingly, 7 areas. So you'd coppice down one area every year. That was the area you knew you did, which is about a 7th, and turn that into charcoal and leave the rest to grow. So you would have had a very different landscape. At the moment, a lot of the hazel coppicing is very overgrown. It ought to have been harvested, and one day, you never know, I might have a go at coppicing and making charcoal. That would be a rather fun thing to do, but I don't know much about it. I know the principle. The principle is you burn it in the absence of oxygen, you make a big pile of it and cover it in turf, and then you monitor it for days, sometimes overnight. So it could be a rather fun thing to do one day, but right now I simply don't have the time. I think riding in the shade, as anybody will know, or with a big hat on, would keep you cooler than having the sun shining on you. Medieval people would of course have known that, and but they had less reason to actually travel perhaps than we do. There was no particular need to do so. It was expensive and potentially dangerous and extremely time consuming. Oh, there's a fallen branch. Come on, good boy. Down we go. Good lad. There's a whole area on the earliest maps I've got. This woodland is marked as a semi-ancient woodland. So it's been here for an awfully long time, and it's on a fairly boggy, weirdly enough, it's on the brow of a hill, minor hill. It's very boggy as well, so there must be a big clay layer underneath it somehow, because it just doesn't drain very well, which is why they chose to grow a woodland here, because it's not really suitable for crops. People familiar with the landscape know there are places to grow things and there are places to not bother growing things, and even with industrial chemicals and industrial fertilizers, some places don't grow very well, whatever you do to them, and that's just to do with the microclimate. And this particular wood, I think, is on a slightly boggy area of ground, albeit higher up than other areas of ground, so that always slightly weirds me out. I was like, how does that work? But that's how it does. You don't have to dig very deep in these woods to hit the water table, whereas you have to dig further down the hill, you have to dig deeper to hit the water table. Somebody will know better than I do what that's all about. I think it is about glaciation and kind of types of clay and types of drainage and soil and all that kind of stuff, so I'm sure geologists understand that very well, but for me it was a little bit weird when I realised the hill was boggier than the downslope parts of the hill. Anyway, medieval people would have definitely known that. You get to know the landscape when you live in it and you see it and you experience it every single day. You watch the seasons turn and change. As I'm doing now, we're in haymaking season. The leaves are in full leaf, beginning to even lose that super green of early growth and turn into the early summer. And then it won't be long before it all goes beautiful colours in the autumn, and then we get winter again, and therefore the cycle keeps repeating itself, which is one of the lovely things about revisiting a place more than once over a period of years. You get to see it change. I even get to see trees. That tree I've just walked over with Silver Moon was standing 4 years ago. It was dead. It was standing dead wood. It fell over in one storm, I presume, and is now sitting there feeding the beetles. Anyway, cycle of life goes on. I shall finish my ride. Doesn't look like I'm going to get wet in the storm, but it's been a rather lovely semi-stormy ride. Hope you enjoyed what you've seen. A slightly different style of a video. I thought it might be amusing for you to listen to me chat. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.